That evening in January 1991, we got home around 5 p.m. My daughter, granddaughter, and my two sons had just spent 12 hours on the road from Cleveland, where we'd gone 4 days earlier to bury my wife's father, dead of cancer at 78. My wife stayed on to spend some time with her bereaved mother. It had been a very busy 4 days for all of us. My oldest son's girlfriend answered the 7 p.m. ring of the doorbell. Another friend of a kid, I thought, as I plowed through the accumulated mail. It's Lester Furr. My heart leapt into my throat. Furr. The dreaded IRS Criminal Division agent who had been harassing those involved with a long-defunct Atlanta NCBA-NCE Club 110 organization my old friend Bill Bickett and I operated for a time. We all thought they were out of our lives. No such luck. He and another younger fellow stood in my hall. Yes, I inquired. We shook hands. He had the grip of a 3-day dead mackerel. Mr. Backert, I have a subpoena for your appearance as a witness before the grand jury. He unfolded the documents and thrust them toward me. I can tell you that you are not the target of our investigation. We just want to talk to you. 9:30 on he pointed to the date, 26th. Right. Right. But if you'll give me your office number, I'll call you that morning and let you know exactly when we might get to you. I gave him the number, and he and his associate turned to leave. But not before he called over his shoulder, "Have a nice day." I'll try. The 3 weeks until the 26th dragged. I alternated between the excitement at having an opportunity to educate 23 of my fellow citizens and fear as I contemplated the power of the forces arrayed against those of us who were attempting to drag the American government back to the Constitution. My fear moved on to terror as I considered the level of ignorance out there. What if this jury was composed of ordinary citizens? There would be no way they'd believe what I had to tell them. They'd think I was nuts. By the morning of the 26th, my excitement overwhelmed my fear. I was actually anxious to talk to these folks. But my fear began to increase as I strode toward Atlanta's Russell Federal Office Building. Once inside the front door, the sense of evil that pervaded that place was absolutely palpable. I could feel it seeping through my pores. I arrived at 9 a.m. and ran the gauntlet of 2 full metal detector X-ray equipped checkpoints and submitted to 2 body searches after my pager set off the alarm. I always find those unnerving, which is most certainly why we are subjected to them. I took the elevator to the 20th floor and told the receptionist that I was there. She dialed the phone and reported my arrival. Around 9:45, Lester Furr came into the witness waiting room and sat down in the chair next to me. "I thought you were going to wait for me to call." I thought about it, but since the subpoena said 9:30, I wanted to be certain I didn't open myself to a contempt charge, just in case you, forgot to call. He looked a bit bewildered, but then he always looked that way. Then from out of left field, "You are going to plead the Fifth Amendment, aren't you?" "Why, no. I thought I'd go in and tell them the truth. When do you think they might be able to see me?" Another confused look from Lester. Probably around 12:30. And how long do you think it might take?" "About 2 hours." With that, Furr got up and walked through the door, now as puzzled as he was bewildered. It didn't register on me at the time, but that conversation set the stage for what happened a bit over 2 hours later. I spent those 2 hours alternately reading and dozing, at peace with my situation and confident that God would take care of me in this powerfully satanic place. Around noon, a fellow in a black suit stuck his head through the door and asked if I was Mr. Backert. As I was the only one in the witness waiting room, I thought he might be able to figure that out. "We're going down to 18 to see Mr. Farrell." I asked him if my briefcase would be safe in the waiting room. He said it would be. Brian Farrell was the assistant U.S. attorney who'd signed my subpoena. I let this guy walk slightly ahead of me so I could study him as we strolled toward the elevator. He was maybe 30 or 35 years old and couldn't keep his head from nervously snapping this way and that as he heard small sounds from inside the office doors as we passed them. This guy was a nervous wreck. I guess years of having to look over your shoulder will do that to you. On the 18th floor, we approached the thick glass window behind which sat a receptionist. My escort waved his hand, and the young black girl pushed a button, releasing the massive electric lock securing the heavy door. We entered the sanctum sanctorum of the offices of the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. As we signed in, nervous Norfus offered that we really have to be careful about security here. There are people who'd like to come in here and kill some of us. No, I offered as sympathetically as I could. He handed me a black, how appropriate, badge to clip to my breast pocket, and we headed down the dingy corridor to a corner office. Lester Furr was already there. When we came in, the young man behind the desk arose slightly and offered his hand. Hello, Mr. Beckert. I'm Brian Farrell. Sit down. I sat in front of his desk, Nervous to my right in the corner, Lester to my left. Farrell slung his right foot atop the corner of his desk and kicked back in his swivel chair. If you want to, you can go home right now. His remark caught me off guard. He appeared to have had a lot of practice catching folks off guard. I paused and responded, Since I've been waiting almost 3 hours, I'd really like to see the grand jury. I knew instantly that I'd said the wrong thing, or at least something these guys had never heard before. Oh, yeah? And what do you want to tell them? His voice now had a steely edge to it. I took a breath. As a taxpayer, I recognize that I'm putting myself at considerable risk by saying this, as I glanced at Lester, but I'd like them to know that Club 110, like NCBA and NCE of Denver, was a First Amendment association established to petition the government for redress of a grievance, that grievance being an unsound, unbacked, unjust paper money system. Club 110, like NCBA and NCE, was an educational group trying to reach citizens with the truth that the Constitution prohibits paper money. Farrell lurched in his seat and literally blurted, That's a lot of horse shit. The vehemence of his remark actually shocked me. Mr. Farrell, you're calling the Constitution you swore to uphold horse shit? He backpedaled. Don't even mention the Constitution in the same breath with this stuff. I think that's a lot of bullshit. He glanced at Lester, who was grinning slightly. I went on. I'd like to tell them that NCBA, NCE has multiple 10th Circuit Appeals Court decisions ordering the IRS to leave us alone, yet the IRS continues to harass us. I'm not about to give you a platform for your radical political philosophy. I wouldn't be doing my job. I thought your job was to get to the truth so that justice might be done. That's right, but I'm not going to give you a forum for your philosophy because I think your philosophy is a bunch of bullshit. It's not my philosophy. It's the philosophy of Jefferson, Madison, Adams, and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Don't mention those guys' names in connection with this situation. Farrell was really quite hostile now. Do you pay your taxes? I pay all lawful taxes. But you don't think you should, do you? How would we defend ourselves if we didn't pay taxes? This guy was really ignorant of history. That's always the argument that's dragged out whenever they talk about taxation. Most folks in authority love to threaten their fellow citizens with a loss of police or fire or defense functions if the so-called tax protest succeeds. But it's really nonsense. To answer your question, defense is one of the few federal government functions specifically called for in the Constitution. We'd fund it and every other legitimate activity of the national government the way we did before 1913 and the alleged adoption of the 16th Amendment, with indirect taxes and levies. Do you know that in 1895 the Supreme Court routinely ruled that direct taxation of individuals was unconstitutional? But we did change the law and enact the 16th Amendment, didn't we? Bill Benson has turned up some serious evidence that the state ratification process was somehow interfered with by a group in Washington who benefited by its passage. Those are really problems you should address to the legislative branch, aren't they, Mr. Backert? Mr. Farrell, our politicians are out of control. If you consider that the members of a grand jury, by the votes they cast for or against prosecution of cases the government brings before them, are the final check on the process. The grand jury really is a sort of legislative body. What I'd like to do today is present my case to the legislative body in the other room. Look, Mr. Farrell, we have a $500+ billion S&L bailout, a $300 billion deficit this year, a $12 trillion national debt. William Seidman is looking for $10 billion to prop up the failing paper money-based banking system. We're in really deep caca, and most Americans don't even realize it or know why. Incredibly, he remained silent until I finished. He even shook his head as I ran through the list. His hostility appeared to abate slightly. Mr. Farrell, I became a grandfather 19 months ago. This beautiful little kid was born naked, wet, and cold, and over $20,000 in debt. That's a really lousy way to have to come into the world. Again he nodded. Farrell again glanced at the two others. Maybe I should let him go in, just to see how the jury reacts to what he has to say. Lester grimaced and looked at his shoes. It was almost humorous. A few seconds ticked silently by before I could almost hear their brains collectively scream, "Nah!" But I don't think I can let you go in, Mr. Backert. I wouldn't be doing my job. If this guy's job isn't to keep the government's thumb on any who would resist the system, I'm still trying to figure out just what it is. Well, I guess we'll simply have to redouble our efforts to reach other citizens in the media, letter columns, and in person. And if you don't remember anything else I said today, remember that historically no unbacked paper money system has lasted more than about 20 years. It took away our silver in 1965, and though it's possible by means of computers and the media campaign to convince the people to continue to have faith in the paper, the politicians have found new ways to keep the game going. I predict the current system will be scrapped in 5 years or so. Please remember who told you that. Farrell nodded. Mr. Farrell, I could tell from your comments that you are somewhat ignorant of some of the issues here. I've studied our constitutional history pretty intensively over 15 years, and if you'll tell me you'll look at it, I'd like to send you some material you may find of interest. Yeah, he said, getting up as I started to leave. Send it to me here and I'll read it. As a dejected Lester escorted me back up the still dingy hall, my brain screamed, "Nah." But I'll send it anyway. Perhaps they can use it if they run short of toilet paper. Lester's voice dripped with insincerity as he again wished me a nice day, and the heavy reinforced door slammed behind me. The indictments against the targets of this investigation came out of the rubber-stamped grand jury the very next day. The target of the indictment, my friend Bill Bickett, was ultimately arrested, denied bond, and incarcerated for 140 days before and during the trial. He was not held at the camp facility. He was held in the main Atlanta pen, the big house next door. Bill represented himself pro per and beat their brains out. At several points during the trial, Judge Forrester praised him for comportment superior to that of most of the lawyers who practiced before him. In one thoroughly memorable moment during the trial, Bill called as a witness a mutual friend and one of his Club 110 members, Bill D. The prosecution table gasped and nearly had a group stroke when the doors burst open and in strode a United States Air Force full bird colonel in dress blues adorned with a chest full of medals and ribbons. The colonel may have been Bill's key to his defense, as in elaborate detail, the colonel explained the constitutional basis for his membership, and in terms the entire jury could grasp, gave a short course on the money issue. In cross-examination, Farrell couldn't lay a glove on the colonel. Oh, did I mention that one of the more active members of the jury just happened to be a major in the United States Air Force Reserves? Bill was acquitted. After being gratuitously subjected to every indignity, including a full body cavity search by a matron of questionable sexuality while held in the Douglas County Jail, Bill's wife had been released from the case 2 days in when it became clear to Judge Forrester that she had absolutely nothing to do with the NCB operation. We lost the wonderful Miss C to cancer in 2003, and although she always understood why he had put them through this ordeal, she went to her grave somewhat angry that Bill had done so. After the verdict came down, most of the U.S. Marshals who brought Bill back and forth to the Atlanta pen and 75 Spring Street came forward, shook his hand, and hugged Carrie. 2 of them had been in the back of the courtroom, having come down on their day off to observe, and in fact one of them rushed forward to help me revive Carrie, who had fainted into my arms at the reading of the verdict. We all repaired to a local restaurant with Pastor McCurry and the good folks from Heritage Baptist Church in Sharpsburg to celebrate the victory. 30 minutes after we left the Russell Building, the phone rang at my home. It was Pat, the gal in the court clerk's office who logged in Bill's motions. She told my wife that when Bill was first brought into the system and began filing motions, they thought perhaps he was a bit unbalanced. But as the process and the motions continued, they came to see the absolute validity of Bill's position, and that the Christians in the Atlanta Federal Court began praying for Bill. Pat went on to say that she and the others were overjoyed that they, the IRS, had failed to get their hands on him. Bill and Pat have gone on to become friends as Bill's post-trial efforts to recover the property the IRS seized during the raid of their home moved through the system. Despite the judge's ruling that the IRS return those materials, including a number of gold and silver coins Bill had been given by a now dead member of his family, the IRS refused and got away with it. Not hard to understand when it is remembered that federal judges also file tax returns. Bill is still my good and close friend. He now lives in the Deep South, enjoying what remain of our freedoms and investigating and writing about injustices wherever he finds them. Given Mr. Trump's uncovering of the deep state and the swamp, there will be more material than a man can write about in several lifetimes. As I record this in September of 2018, the worsening judicial, or just us, system abuses of citizens who dare to question or outright challenge our deep state masters continue unabated. With a bit of luck and massive public pressure from us deplorables, President Trump may succeed in flushing out the deep state swamp creatures and criminals who would take us to a totalitarian hell. Trust me when I say that failure is not an option. We have plans for more programs of this sort, focused on specific cases of those ongoing abuses and injustices. If you pray, please add President Trump to your list, as the threat he poses to the dark side has already marked him for elimination. And if you don't believe that you have skin in this game, let me close with the 423 BC words of Pericles, citizen of Athens, quote, "A man may be personally ever so well off, and yet if his country be ruined, he must be ruined with it," close quote.